Welcome to France, where the time is 91 minutes past 3. That is, if you're using decimal time. And this is the only country in the world that ever has. France introduced a decimal day made up of 10 hours divided into 100 minutes, each made up of 100 seconds. It did so in the wake of the French Revolution, along with a similarly doomed decimal calendar based around a 10-day week, unhelpfully called a decade. The decimal clock and calendar lasted barely longer than a decade, one of our decades itself, but the revolutionary spirit that brought it about is responsible for the metric system of meters, litres and grams, used now by most of the world. However, there are still some stubborn imperial holdouts using an idiosyncratic system of inches, miles, pints and pounds. So let's talk about that. In particular, let's talk about those terms. Whose foot is a foot? What does a metre actually metre? Let's weigh up the differences and get the measure of the word origins in another Rob Words. Excuse me taking shelter in the shade. I don't know what the temperature is in Celsius or Fahrenheit, but it's above Englishman melting point. So let's begin with the imperial, or if you're in the United States, US customary units. Why start with those? Well, because they are older than metric, way older, much older than the British Empire that gives the imperial system its name, older even than the Roman Empire. The idea behind all of these is that they represent physical measurements in the real world, usually sizes of parts of the body, and the earliest body bits that they are related to belonged to the ancient Egyptians, who pioneered a system of judging the size of something by digits, the width of a finger, palms, the width of a hand, and cubits, which were the distance from the elbow to the tip of the middle finger, maybe even Pharaoh's own regal arm. Digit is from the Latin digitus, meaning finger, and cubit is from the Latin cubitum, which means elbow. Of course, the Egyptians didn't call them that. They had their own names for them, but it is notable that we're using the Roman words for them, because this system ultimately passes through ancient Greece onto the Romans and eventually onto us. The Greek pous, literally foot, is descended from half an Egyptian cubit, and the Roman pes, again literally foot, is based on the Greek one. But where the Greeks divided their foot confusingly into fingers, dactyloi, the Romans divided theirs into 12 equal parts that they called unciae, or twelfths. And the singular uncia is the origin of our word inch, of which there are still 12 to the foot. But that's not all. We also have another word directly descended from the Latin uncia, our unit of weight, the ounce, of which there are, of course, 12 to the pound. Except there aren't. Are there? There was, but thanks to the 14th century introduction in England of the French system of avoir du poids, which doesn't mean have some peas, it's a corruption of Middle French for goods by weight, we now have 16 ounces to the pound. That's right, 16 twelfths to the pound. Well done, everybody. By the way, the abbreviation for ounce, OZ, or OZ, is based on a really old Italian word for ounce, onza. And another, by the way, at one point, an ounce was also a unit of time, too. Check out this description of a medieval alternative to splitting up the hour into minutes and seconds. An hour contains 4 points, and a point 10 moments. A moment 12 ounces, spelt unkies here, and an ounce 47 atoms. So if you've ever wondered how long a moment actually is, it's 12 ounces. Or 90 seconds if you prefer your time that way. Anyway, I've digressed far enough. So an inch means a twelfth, and we got it from the Romans. And we got it directly from them too. A lot of Latin words in English were borrowed after the fact. We've deliberately reached back in time for a word from ancient Rome. But words like inch and mile, which we'll get onto, enter the Germanic languages that become English when the Romans are still knocking about. They're among the earliest Latin entrants into English, which I think is kind of cool. And we're talking about getting the words for the measurements from the Romans here, not necessarily the measurements themselves. What I mean is what we call an inch or a foot is not exactly the same size as a Roman inch or a Roman foot. It's often said that our modern foot is based on the foot of England's King Henry I, but I think that's more legend than fact. Since antiquity, the foot has been a notional foot, not based on any individual person's body parts. For a long time, there were various feet sizes doing the rounds. That is, until around 1300, when a different king of England, Edward I, appears to have had enough. He decided to create a single official foot based upon a single official inch. And that inch was to be based upon a physical object, or rather, a handful of them. And lo, it was decreed that henceforth 3 grains of barley, dry and round, make an inch. Of course, what could be more consistent than a grain of barley? The statute did specify that it should be plucked from the middle of the ear, but is that really the best that they could do? Anyway, our modern inch is basically still the same size, and the barleycorn is still a measure that we use today, although I think most normal people don't know it. Check this out. In both British and American shoe sizes, the difference between one size and the next is precisely 1 barleycorn. 1/3 of an inch. Oh, and look, we're back at feet. 1/3 of a foot is called a hand, by the way, which is obviously silly. That's the same hand that they use to measure the height of horses. If you need metric, a hand is just a smidge over 10 centimetres, and a foot is a slightly bigger smidge over 30 centimetres. 3 feet, in turn, make a yard, so 90 centimetres. The word yard coming from a really old Germanic word for a rod or a stick, one of a fixed length that you would use to measure something. It's not actually related to your backyard, believe it or not, which comes from a different Old English word meaning an enclosure. Historically, for occasions when your yardstick, which is a tautology now I think about it, was not long enough, there was an even bigger measure, literally called a pole, a rod, or a perch. You could take your pick which one, because they were all equal to 5.5 yards. 5.5 yards, yeah, it's weird, isn't it? Yeah, well that is actually for a really interesting reason. 5.5 yards is equal to 15 Saxon feet, a measure in use prior to the reforms of the 1300s. It was really handy to have a unit based on the Saxon foot, because the Saxons created a lot of the land boundaries. It made converting their measurements to the modern way a bit easier, a little bit easier to fathom. Huh? And there's another imperial measurement, the fathom. I am approximately a fathom tall, actually just a little bit more. A fathom is 2 yards, or 6 feet. Fathom comes from an Old English word meaning 2 arms outstretched, you see, which is interesting because that is, for most of us, basically our height. But we mainly use the fathom for depths now, because it was a handy unit for spacers on the lines that mariners would drop to the sea floor to work out how much water was beneath them. And hey look, we're back to measurements based on bits of people, but our next one, I'm trying to work upwards in length here, is not based on a human measurement, but an animal measurement. 220 yards, or 40 poles, makes a furlong, a word that literally means furrow long, and is usually said to be the distance a pair of oxen can plough before they need a little rest. Gnaw, and the plough gets turned around. The entire area that the oxen could plough in a day became the acre, from a really old Germanic word meaning cultivated field. Later on, we also get the measurement the chain, which is 1/10 of a furlong and made up of 100 links, which is sounding suspiciously decimal, isn't it? Anyway, it's based on a physical chain belonging to a clever 17th century fellow called Edmund Gunter, of whom I could not find a picture, and who devised a way of surveying land with a chain. So how are you liking all these quirky imperial measures? Let's see how many we can squeeze into this next bit. Whenever I visit France, I find myself missing TV from back home, but not for long, because I use this video's sponsor, NordVPN. Whether on a Spanish island, a city break in Poland, or basking in Palm Beach, NordVPN allows you to, for example, access streaming content from anywhere else in the world by changing your online location. And there are a ton of other benefits too. For a start, disguising your IP address means you can use unsecured Wi-Fi networks, knowing that thou art protected. But in terms of broader online protection, NordVPN is in a league of its own. Thanks to its Threat Protection Pro feature, you don't need to inch around the internet, fearful of online fraudsters with zero scruples. That actually is a measure. It'll stop malware-infected downloads, flag websites known for scamming people, and block trackers, even without having the VPN switched on, meaning you can surf the net without an ounce of fear. I have NordVPN switched on all the time because I often work in cafes where the Wi-Fi isn't necessarily secure. Plus, I can protect my whole family by having it on up to a thoroughly decimal 10 devices. Let NordVPN lend you a hand too. Use my special link in the description or go to nordvpn.com/robwordsvpn and get an exclusive deal, plus 4 extra months on top. There's a 30-day money-back guarantee, so there is not a grain of risk. Give it a go. It's firkin great. Let's talk about miles. It's another of those words we got absolutely ages ago from the Romans. It's from the Latin mille passus, meaning 1,000 paces, because to the Romans, that's how long one was. It's reckoned to have equated to around 1,618 yards, or just shy of 5,000 feet. But there have been all kinds of miles down the years. Our modern mile was fixed by old Queen Bess, Elizabeth I, who put a stop to all of the nonsense. She decided a mile should be 8 furlongs, or 5,280 feet. A number that doesn't look like an improvement on the nice round 5,000 feet of the old London mile, but that kind of is, because it's divisible by 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, 10, 11, 12, 16, 32, and more. But it's still a number I just really struggle to keep in my head. Even worse, actually, is the nautical mile, which these days is 6,076.1 feet. It's a marginally more sensible number in metres, which just feels wrong. 3 miles make a league, and 3 nautical miles make a nautical league. My fascinating word fact to go with this one is that this league and this league are not related. The league meaning the distance comes from this Latin word, and the league meaning a collective is from this Latin word. But over time their English spellings have morphed to become the same. Now, we've already covered a lot of distance with all these imperial measures, but a few other units are worth honourable mentions. The pint most likely gets its name from a Latin word meaning simply liquid measure, a word that is weirdly also related to our word picture. How can that be? Well, perhaps because the original picture vessels used to measure the liquid had markings drawn on them, perhaps a bit like a measuring chuck does. A pint is half of a quart, which comes from the Latin quarta, meaning a quarter. What's it a quarter of? Well, a gallon, which comes from a vulgar Latin word that meant a bucket, or a measure of wine. But don't try running your car on a gallon of wine. I don't think it'll work. I don't have a car, so I can't be sure. What else do we have? Oh, well, what kind of Englishman would I be if I didn't mention the pound? Pound traces back to the classical Latin pondo, which meant by weight. When we use it to refer to the unit of weight, we are abbreviating the Latin phrase livre pondo, which translates to pound by weight. Confusingly, it's the word libra here that translates to pound, because as discussed, the pondo bit means by weight. The Roman equivalent of the pound measure was called the libra. And that is why the abbreviation for pound is LB for Libra. What's more, it's also why the British currency, the pound, is represented by this symbol, which is in fact just an ornate L representing Libra. The original pound was a pound weight, a Libra pondo, of silver. While we're on weights, we need to address the fact that we have a tonne of tonnes. A British tonne or long tonne of 2,240 pounds, an American tonne or short tonne of 2,000 pounds, and a metric tonne of 2,204.62 pounds, or 1,000 kilograms. The metric tonne is sometimes spelt like the French word tonne, from which all these tonnes are derived. It means in French a barrel, and is also the root of our word tonne, meaning barrel, which in turn is a measure of volume itself. So that means there are 4 units called a tonne. Have you been keeping up? Because it is confusing, isn't it? That is precisely why the metric system exists. During the French Revolution, the revolutionaries didn't just want to get rid of the monarchy, they wanted to renew society altogether, an act that they felt would be helped by eradicating the hundreds of different units of measurement in use across France. They decided that the best way to do that was to create a new regime of measures based not on subjective and inconsistent measures, but on a precise, immutable unit. Instead of basing measurements of distance on human features like feet and strides, they would be based on one unchanging value: the size of planet Earth. Named after the Greek word metros, meaning simply measure, the metre was to be fixed at 1/10,000,000th of the shortest distance from the North Pole to the equator, passing through Paris, naturellement. Calculating that measure in the 1790s was no mean feat. It took some clever mathematics by a couple of enterprising Frenchmen, tracing the meridian from Barcelona to Dunkirk to come up with a final figure. A figure that wasn't quite correct. Travel 10 million metres south from the North Pole and you'll actually end up just over a couple of kilometres short of the equator. But it's not bad, and so the metre was born. A quick note on spelling here. Metre as a unit is spelt like this, based on the French spelling, all over the English-speaking world, except in the United States. Thank Noah Webster and his American dictionary for the change. This word does exist in other Englishes, but it means something used to measure something, from the verb to meet. The unit of capacity in the metric system, the rhyming litre, is also based on the metre. It's the volume of a cube, that is, 1/10 of a metre by 1/10 of a metre by 1/10 of a metre. Put another way, it is a decimetre cubed. Meanwhile, the gram was originally defined as the weight of a centimetre cubed of distilled water. Which brings us to the nice, simple way that the metric system divides up and multiplies its metre, using prefixes. Latin prefixes for the divisions of a metre and Greek prefixes for the multiples of a metre. Have you ever noticed that Latin-Greek thing before? There are exceptions. Micro and nano are from Greek, but a metre divided by 1,000 is prefixed with the Latin for 1,000, milli. A metre multiplied by 1,000 is prefixed by the Greek for 1,000, kilo. The same goes for litres and grams too. Milli, centi, deci, Latin, kilo, hecta, deca, Greek. Not that we use deca and hecta all that much these days, although hecta is hiding in the word hectare, which represents 100 heirs. Once you get beyond the kilo prefix, they start to get a bit more colourful. Mega is from the Greek for really big, giga is from the Greek for giant, and tera is from the Greek for monster. From then onwards, the prefix tells you how many bunches of 3 zeros there are in the quantity, based loosely on the Greek and Latin words for different numbers. Peta is based on the Greek for 5, for example, penta, hence 5 lots of 3 zeros. These are, of course, all huge numbers. The only time you're ever actually likely to come across them is if, for whatever reason, you need to store a monumental amount of data. The metric system is by far the globally dominant system for measurements. That French revolutionary metre really caught on, unlike their weird clocks and weird calendars. Now, all of these countries are on metric. Look at all that blue. Even the United States and the UK are officially signed up to the metric, or SI system. However, if you spend any time in either country, you'll know that that may be the theory, but it isn't the practice. America is a major imperial holdout with its US customary units, and I've noticed that there's a common misconception outside of Britain that we're fully committed to metric. Nuh-uh. Our road system is still in miles and yards, we give our height in feet and inches, and we order our warm beer by the pint. I even remember having to convert Celsius temperatures to Fahrenheit for my gran. I used to double it and then add 29. It gets you close enough. In fact, the US has decimalised ahead of the UK in at least one instance that I can think of. The American currency has always been decimal, with 10 cents to the dime and 10 dimes to the dollar, whereas we Brits had to wait until the 1970s to get decimal money. Before there were 100 pence to the pound, there were 2 farthings to the halfpenny, 2 halfpennies to the penny, 12 pennies to the shilling, and 20 shillings to the pound. So pound was 240 pence. That seems silly now, but I'm glad there are still some parts of the world using the imperial system. Purely from a word nerd perspective, it'd be a shame to see so many of these quirky terms fall out of use. Wasn't the imperial bit of this video so much richer than the etymology of the metric bit? There is of course a beauty to both systems. One relates the size of everything to the measurements of everyday life, and the other equates even the tiniest unit to the division of our entire planet. Vive la différence, I say. If you enjoyed this video, do hit subscribe and like. It sounds weird when you say it that way around. And maybe watch this video next, and I'll see you over there. In the meantime, take care.